What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Product Mastercast. As you can see, I'm doing things just a little bit differently. I'm doing a talk, and this topic was a talk I did at the beginning of 2020 before everybody ran into their lockdowns, unfortunately. I'm fortunate for me, I was able to do that talk before it happened. And it's a concept that I've actually been working on since, and it's now the 8 product principles for an agile business model. So you can see there's design thinking, lean, and agile. There are these 3 frameworks that people might be familiar with or not, but they have principles that they teach us, and I want to bring those home into our product development. So I'll be touching on these 3 frameworks and then diving into their principles. So I hope you enjoy. Let's have a look straight into it. Okay, cool. So what is a digital product? So I've realized that people might not be familiar with what I do and what the podcast is about. So I thought, let me just give a quick rundown. So a product, as we might understand it, is an object or a system made available for consumer use or to satisfy a want or need. Now, very basic. So I put a picture of a shoe there just to sort of drive this home a little bit. So you've got a shoe, it's got fashion, and it protects your feet. That is the value. That's why we want it. It looks cool, so maybe that's why we want it. Then we've got your conventional watch. It tells us the time. Also a bit of a fashion statement. So those are your conventional type products. But as we moved along, we've come to realize that products are evolving, and we've actually got digital products. So the smartwatch is a nice way for me to show you how products are moving into a new space where there is actually a digital element to the watch. So each one of those little icons there are some sort of a software that's sitting inside of the watch. So it's no longer just telling us time, it's telling us a whole bunch of things. And quite a popular type digital product is, if you don't recognize that logo, it's Spotify. And Spotify is an online platform or digital platform for us to be able to listen to music. There's also podcasts, and probably going to evolve into other things too. But it's a digital platform for us to listen to our music. We don't longer buy the CDs. The product used to be that CD or that record, and now we just listen to it digitally, right? And then we've got the type of products like Uber, which is not necessarily just a digital product, but it's actually what we call a marketplace, where we have 2 sides of a coin, where we have in Uber's instance, we have a driver and we have a passenger that now need to drive. And so the digital space is giving us that opportunity for a marketplace to be created. And that is driving what we now call the gig economy. So, so as I say, they looks into smartphones, tablets, PCs, and laptops, and that's where you're finding these digital products. Now, what's important to understand is that products are evolving, and they don't just stay. They are continuously improving. They are bringing us better and different value propositions. And a great example of that is just to say to you, I mean, if you had to think 5, 10, 15 years ago, Skype was the leading video conferencing tool that was used by most people. But now everyone seems to be using Zoom. We've also got Google Meets and all of these other products on the market. Now, why isn't Skype still around and the main one that we use? And it's obviously because of what I've just explained, like the continuous improvements, the different value propositions. It could be the marketing side of things. And that's why it's important when we talk about the business model around the agile business model that these things provide. Xero is another example. That's an accounting platform that people use to track their businesses on. But when I was studying back, I won't tell when, but when I was studying, we were taught Pastel. And Pastel was just your accounting system that everyone used. And obviously over time, things have evolved and changed. And now we've got all these different products that offer very different types of values for us. And they're looking at different needs. So I know that Pastel now Sage, if I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, so things are evolving. They're continuously evolving. And so the question is, how are things constantly changing? What processes and tools and what is it that people are using in order to stay ahead of the game? So you've probably heard of Agile, and I'm going to talk into that. We've got different schools of thought. We've got Agile, Lean, and Design Thinking. The 3 frameworks are out there for us. And I'm going to be talking about the 8 product principles for an Agile business model that they provide. So the principles is where I want to drive it home for us today. So yes, guys, you probably saw a glimpse of this already, but yes, please subscribe to the channel. Your support is highly appreciated. It helps making sure that I know that people are gaining value from it. It's my little digital product for you. So please leave a comment, share, subscribe, and let spread the word. Please, if you've got comments, if you've got suggestions, please fire away. I'm open to feedback and looking forward to it. So yeah, let's not dive into that for too long. I'm going to get into the actual podcast now. So what is Agile? So Agile is, as you can see here, a process that is used to speed up production. All right. That sounds a bit vague. But yeah, let me just kind of explain it from this point of view. I think this is better to look at. So this concept, you might not have thought about it before, but there's a thing called Waterfall. And Waterfall is the traditional approach to project management. In the beginning of a product, you will look at, getting all the requirements. So before you get into a project or a product, you get all the requirements. You then, as you can see, it goes down a line or over the wall, as some people call it. But the requirements go down into the design department as such, and they start designing according to those requirements that were written out. And from there, it goes down into the engineering team or the development team, and they start actually implementing those designs and those requirements into code or whatever it is. And then from there, it goes into a testing environment where it actually gets tested and whatnot. And then once it's released into the big wide world, it is then maintained. Now, the concept of waterfall is that, well, one thing, things are in sort of silos, and one step only starts once the other one has ended. So what will happen is after, 6 months, whatever it is, you might release something into the world and it is not received very well. So you've waited 6 months, a year, whatever it is going to be, to see if it's actually going to get used or if it's really wanted by the world. And is, how much resources, how much money have you put into this? And it's a product that is not wanted by the world. Okay, so scary thought there, right? So we've got the Agile way of doing things, right? And the Agile framework was designed by developers for developers, and it's kind of been in the software world for quite some time now. But the interesting thing is that we are starting to see that these ways of doing things can go further than just your software or your engineering department, and you can bring it into all development, all parts of your company. And so I'll talk mostly on a product side of things, but in here, you'll see that you'll have a backlog that you analyze, define, design, and test, and then deploy. And instead of doing one thing at a time and then passing it on to the next department, you're actually getting the departments to work together at the same time and trying to achieve goals together and deploying something workable by the end of every time. So to go into more detail, to get this right, you are going to be working in an incremental way of doing things. So instead of doing everything at once. So if you look at the painter there, obviously Da Vinci, and you had this idea of painting the Mona Lisa. And so you already knew what he wanted, and you then built incrementally on top of it, did section by section by section by section until he got to the end of his painting. There's also the iterative way of doing things where you kind of have an idea of where it's going to go, and then you iterate on top of your initial start. So, you get your pencil out, you start drawing before you even add the paint. And so you build on top, on top, on top. And these two concepts are very important in understanding how Agile talks to this in your product development. This diagram is a nice way to kind of put it into a picture for us. So where it starts is with your vision at the beginning, and that is sort of held by your product owner or your stakeholders as such. And they then turn their vision or their idea into user stories. User stories, looking from a user's point of view, get put into a product backlog. That backlog is then prioritized according to value and complexity, and then brought into what we call a sprint backlog. So the sprint backlog is what we'll be working on in the next 2 to 4 weeks. So each company, each team might have a different cadence in terms of how long they use their sprints for. You don't have it less than 2 weeks, 1 week sprints. I've seen it being attempted at, doesn't generally work. And then 4 weeks, you don't want to be doing something longer than 4 weeks without getting any feedback. And that's the biggest thing when we talk about Agile, is getting continuous feedback. So what happens is, not only do you turn in that cycle every 2 to 4 weeks, but every day your team is coming together again and then looking into where they are in their progress, any impediments and so forth. And that's what we call the daily scrum. And I think in these remote days, everyone's kind of doing these daily stand-ups without, where it came from. And it's, this agile scrum way of doing things. So after every 2 to 4 weeks, at the end of every sprint, we want to be releasing something of value. So a new functionality, we put it in that box, for example, and we want to ship it. That little piece of software that we have developed for the last 2 to 4 weeks, we want to then give it to the stakeholders or the clients or whoever is kind of, the sponsors of the project, for example. and they're going to review what we worked on. And you kind of, it needs to be something that was able to be released as such. And yeah, reviewed, see where everything's right, look where things are missed. Is all the hypothesis that we thought about correct? The team will then, after the review, look at that feedback and then retrospect amongst each other and sort of see where things are going right and wrong. And I'll be touching more on this retrospective later, but very important to understand that at the end of every sprint, the team retrospects and then goes back to the drawing board, starts looking at that selected product backlog and prioritizes, breaks the tasks down and into another sprint backlog. And so the cycle gets repeated. So those are very important concepts to understand. And then from a product point of view, to understand how a backlog works, all right? And I think this is quite an important concept. Your backlog is, if you look at this, is at the top of your funnel, is where all your ideas are. So everyone has ideas, everyone thinks they understand what they want to build. And what we call at the top, at the big chunks of work are your epics. And the epics are big pieces of ideas or work that hasn't really been broken down. And this is where your product owner and your Scrum Masters start working together with the team to start breaking down all those ideas into workable chunks and prioritizing what is most important. And that is a topic and a conversation all on its own. But how do we find value and breaking down what we want to do into smaller chunks so that by the time it gets to the end or to the bottom of the funnel, it is ready and what we call the definition of ready for the development team to actually go ahead and start working on. So there's no sort of hindrance of, okay, let's go and find out what to do. The things have already been broken down into small chunks. So to get this right, there is the Agile manifesto, and it's so important for me to bring this to you. It's my mentor that got me into Scrum and Agile. He's told me to, have you read it? And and it's for a reason. And I think for anyone that's getting into the space, and to just always have this somewhere that you can read and pick up or look at it often, because the concepts in the manifesto are so important, and you get thrown challenges, and it's nice to just kind of think about, what did the Agile manifesto teach us? So quickly, just to go over it: individuals and interactions over processes and tools. To continuously iterate and build those increments of work, you need to make sure that you have the right conversations with the people. So individuals and interactions are such an important part of this. And it's not that you don't focus on your processes and tools, but you just you make sure that the individuals are talking and making sure that problems are being solved. So that is quite important. The next one is, we work towards working software over comprehensive documentation. So at the end of every sprint, we want to focus on making sure that we are releasing something that is actually workable and ready for the market. Instead of sitting and pining over the documentation, we just make sure that the software is there. Doesn't mean that you don't do the documentation again, but your focus is on making sure you release workable software. The next big one speaks to the last one too, and that is customer let me try that again. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. So talking to your clients, talking to your users actually holds more value than sitting there and pining again over a contract negotiation. Again, protect yourself, make sure you have that contract in place, but things are going to change, and that speaks to the last one: responding to change over following a plan. And the concept here in product design is that we have these ideas, but it's only once you start building them and once you start breaking it down, if you think of the funnel, do you realize the complexities that are faced with you in doing this work. So it's important that you can't foresee it, something you don't know what's going to happen. So make sure that you're consistently collaborating with your clients, with your partners, so that when things, impediments come along the way, you guys are aligned and you understand. So again, there we go. So responding to change over following a plan, also very important. So to get this right, just quickly, we have three main sort of roles as such within the product space. We've got a product owner, more external, one looking after the client and also looking after your users. They hold the vision, they hold it clear to them, and they make sure that the next one, the development team, are the ones that are working towards that vision, and sort of the product owner makes sure that the compass is always in place. So your development team, cross-functional, I'll talk about that later. And it is where all the people that are actually working on the systems or building the products itself. So it's your development team, right? Then you've got your Scrum Master, who's the one that actually looks after your development team. So very much more internal, looking into the impediments that your development team have, the servant leader that's looking after them and helping them sort of, go through what they need to get done. And then they work closely with the product owner as well in order to, make sure that those visions, the product vision is being maintained and looked after. So very, very important. And I think sometimes I think the Scrum Master role is a bit overlooked, but very important. They're the ones that set the environment up to make sure that this whole system is running as smooth as possible. It might seem simple when you look at these diagrams, but it's actually not as easy as it seems. So go give your Scrum Master, if you have one, go give him or her a high five when you see them next time. Cool. So then that's Agile in a nutshell, I guess. The next concept to understand is the Lean Startup. So the Lean Startup is a book that was written by Eric Ries. It's actually quite an old book now, and he gave us the concept of Lean. All right. And Lean is a movement now as such. There's a lot of people that are actually incorporating this in their business, in their product design. And what it is exactly, and excuse me for the long-winded words, but it's a methodology for developing businesses and products using shortened product development cycles. So you want to develop those products using shorter timeframes. And the concept that he talks to there, it speaks to Agile, right, is to make sure that you start building something as quickly and as minimal as you can, and most importantly, looking for feedback. So the concept is to rapidly discover if a proposed business model is actually viable. And I'll touch on that next. So you want to quickly discover, because in his book, he describes how he started building a product that was in the chat space, in the instant messaging space. And he built and had all this elaborate code and everything, and then released the product just to quickly realize that users weren't comfortable using it. And there were different reasons for that they discovered over time. So instead of spending that long time using the waterfall approach as such, that you quickly get your feedback and build as little as possible and quickly learn. So as the last point there says, it is achieved by adopting a combination of creating business hypotheses, so multiple business hypotheses that we want to tackle, that you want to validate through empirical learning experiments. Empirical learning through experience, so you want experiments to learn, and you want to get feedback of people actually using the product or getting some feel of it and learning from that. So you then go into that iterative product release cycle, as was explained in the Agile side. So you can see how closely they are linked together. And so the Lean Startup, in his book, Eric Ries speaks about the MVP, the minimal viable product. And I think a lot of people are throwing this term around quite loosely, and it can be quite dangerous because it's quite vague. But in essence, what is he saying is like, how little can we build to start understanding that people want to use it, that users are actually going to go and use our product. So you want to build it, and we call that our MVP. But there's other concepts like the MMP, minimal marketable product, or your MSP, which I'll also speak about, your minimal sellable product. So when can you actually start making money out of it? And so what happens is when you start building in this rapid release cycle, you can then get that feedback from the clients and or users, and you then go into a thing called pivot, where we pivot into a different thing. So you might release something and realize, but hold on, that's not where the value is. The value is over there. And hence you pivot into what that is going to now be. So again, very dangerous concept. You can't just be pivoting all the time, but it's important that you are pivoting according to that user feedback that you are receiving. I'll talk on a bit next. And then he talks about, quite importantly, the just-in-time concept. The just-in-time concept is something that was developed in Japan. I think it was Toyota that could not compete with Ford, that had perfected the production line in America. They didn't have the resources, the space, and all of that. So what they did is they would get all the equipment and resources and stuff like that into a warehouse only when they needed it. So they would sort of build according to order and not saying, okay, let's just do everything in mass production. Let's build just in time. And so bringing that into the software side of things is that you're building it with a much shorter cycle, instead of doing it in that waterfall approach where you do it in over 6 months, whatever. So these three concepts are what he drives mostly in his book, but there's obviously lots. I would really recommend reading the book. It's an easy read, and there's lots to learn from it. So it's important. He also explains this development cycle, and I think everybody in the product space is trying to achieve this, is to learn, build, measure, build, measure, learn. And it's a cycle that doesn't stop. So obviously you want to build something, you build a product, but it starts from an idea. So you take your idea, you build it, it becomes a product. You want to then measure it, see how it actually goes into the market, how are people using it. and then you learn from the data that comes in from them, looking at feedback as to, how they use the actual product. And then it goes back into ideas, because those learnings that you got, you're going to turn them into a new idea that you build, measure, learn, and you go into this continuous cycle of learning. Oops. So quite important, I feel, in my experience, is the importance of data. So make sure you understand where you will be measuring your progress. I think a lot of people build something and they're not actually not sure where they're going to be measuring it. So make sure you know where you're going to measure it. Just put that in the beginning of your mindset when you start building this. What data are we wanting to capture? What reports? What are we looking at retrieving so that we can move on forward? So important to set targets and then compare that measurement to that. So we'll talk about OKRs as well, where you actually put in an outcome and look at how we're going to measure that potential outcome, and you do it through your data. So make sure you understand your targets. So what this all does is it helps us put a brain on our agile delivery. And so we can actually not just go ahead and build something, we actually have an idea of what we are building. And it's not just about velocity and pushing out work all the time, but we're actually thinking about it. We're actually consciously looking at what is the user saying and then working above that. So I just want to put a disclaimer out there. This talk and this thing is inspired by Jeff Gothelf, who also talks about these three concepts. And he speaks also about the idea of putting a brain on top of your agile delivery, just explaining it in that way. It just makes so much sense. So it complements Agile in that it fuses adaptation with the fact that we can't predict the future. So I explained that earlier. When you want to build something, people still talk about business plans. The old traditional way of, getting a loan from the bank is writing these elaborate business plans. But those business plans are generally written off assumptions, right? And so there's this new way of doing things where you actually go into getting a loan or some investment with actual feedback, some actual metrics to work off. So that's why it's so important to understand this. So I'm going to move on, but I think the message is there. Make sure you understand your data, where you're going to look at it, and what is it that you're looking for. Right. So the next concept or the next framework is design thinking. Now, this is also something that's gaining a lot of traction. I'm hearing more and more about it, but it's been around for a long time. And it was designed by this man called David Kelly, or he kind of, took the claim, and his company, IDEO. So what is design thinking? It's a cognitive, strategic, and practical method of coming up with product solutions. So how do you go about doing it? Is you go through these 5 steps. You empathize, you define, you ideate, create a prototype, and then test that prototype. And so just going into it a little bit more detail, and it's very important to understand, to just drive home the empathy side of things. So you want to learn about the audience. And I think everyone's kind of getting to that point where we need to understand our users a lot more. So when you start going down into that solution space, make sure you understand who are the users, who's your target market, what is important to them. Now, there's many ways of doing that. I've just listed a couple of things just to guide you if you want to visit this again. But do interviews, you want to be shadowing, you want to just get to understand the users as much as possible. Because once you've done that, you can create a point of view based on their needs and insights. So what do the users actually need? What is it that they want? So personas, you want to build personas. So for example, a soccer mom, just to label it, a soccer mom, what kind of car does she want to drive? Does she want to drive a Speedster? No, she wants to drive some sort of an SUV. So building a persona according to that product that you're building is important. What are the objectives of what we're trying to do? So define the product, define the users. What are the challenges? What are the pain points that you're going to be faced with? So design thinking makes sure that we get around the table and we have these discussions and we build it, and we build accordingly. So once you've defined, you can then get your teams or your people together and you start brainstorming or whatever it is. You come up with as many ideas as possible. How are we going to solve these problems? And there's different ways of doing that. You want to share ideas. There's the how might we statements that you can use. There's crazy eights. You can do lightning demos, and you can do all of these things to try and get to that idea that's going to bring home that solution that you've been looking to solve that problem, right? So once you come up with the idea, so you'll vote. There's different ways. Again, I think what's important to just drive home is that design thinking is like the cookbook. It's like there's many ways that you can do this. There's not like a set way, and I'll talk about the book, the sprint book next. But so there's lots of ways of doing it. You can go research and look into it. But ideating. You want to, just get as many ideas around the table. There's obviously lots of ways to do that. And once you've got that idea, you can vote on which one you think is the most, practical one to go down, what road you want to go down, and you build a prototype, a very basic version of what this is going to look like, a mock-up of such. You can create storyboards. And the important thing is you want to keep it simple so that you can fail fast, so that you can iterate quickly. It's almost like one sentence there. But it's so important that you just keep it simple. It could be very basic, and then give it to somebody so you test it and understand, is this prototype that we're thinking of using or building, is it worthwhile? So no code has been written at this point, but you're now breaking down the idea. And so your UX people in the user experience and customer side of things will be using and are in this design thinking space. Anyways, going back into testing, you can do some role playing. You can, the whole point is to understand impediments with the design, what is wrong with it, and then you can iterate as quickly as possible. So now that you guys understand those concepts or those frameworks, let's dive into the actual 8 principles. So the first principle I like to talk about is teams over processes. It's in the Agile manifesto that I've already spoken about, but it's your individuals and interactions over processes and tools. I can't explain or stress it enough, just the importance of having the people around a table and building solutions together. Those interactions are so important and beautiful to watch. So this is a basic makeup of a development team. So, looking at your software engineering team and so forth. But yeah, so you've got your Scrum Master. I've put him in the middle, her in the middle. And so they're the people that kind of keep the glue together. You've got your product owner who holds the vision. QA stands for quality assessors. So they're the testers, making sure that everything is working correctly. Your BA is your business analyst. He's the one or she's the one that is looking into whether something is viable, feasible to build, making sure the market is ready. What is the market talk saying? And very important that they all come together. You've got your actual engineers that are going to be developing the product, and your UX team that actually designs the stuff. So they all sit nicely together and very important. So this is your a makeup of a general development team. So important is to make sure that your teams are cross-functional. So in this example, we've got a very cross-functional team, and we have different types of skills coming together that are going to complement the whole product in totality. So very important concept, make sure your teams are cross-functional. They can do you have more than one skill set on hand. Keep your team small. The bigger your team is, the more harder it is to manage. People hide. So keep your team small, and it doesn't mean that it's one big product and you're only going to have a small team, but you can have multiple teams working on one product. But in terms of your actual team, you want to keep them small. Have your Scrum Master work them. Scrum Master can work with more than one team, but keeping that team small and so that it's empowered. I'm going to kind of talk about it now, but the smaller the team, the easier it is to keep the glue together. And then making sure your team is dedicated. Now, depending on the business, the company that you're working in, but you want to have your team working on only one product at a time or project at a time, because you don't want them, working half the time on one thing and then shifting their mindsets. It's very difficult for someone to constantly do that, and it could, really hold the team back. So you want them nice and dedicated to that product team. So I've put this one in bold because, we've lived our lives in 2020 where things have gone remote, and we've very actually quickly realized that we can do all of these things in a remote space. But co-located is best. Remote teams have been around for a long time, and I think we've gotten a hell of a lot better. 2020 fast forwarded that for us as well. We realized how much we can actually do when we're remote. But co-located is best when everyone's around, and it's very quick to just kind of look over your shoulder and get the team together and quickly brainstorm an idea or a problem that's arisen. So co-located, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people's opinion, is that being around together is better and easier. So you want to empower the team. You want to be giving them the opportunity to solve problems and make them feel they're part of the solutions that we are creating. And then a very important concept is that conversations matter. It's got a slide of its own. So this picture comes from Jeff Patton's book, User Story Mapping. Very cool book. I suggest you reading. It's a way of, also you can put it in the design thinking realm if you like. But it's a way for us to break down what our product is going to be doing. in his book, he talks about, how we should make our conversations happen as much as possible. And I think that this graphic just drives it home for us. When you have people sort of working in silos and not really talking to each other, they think that they understand what they need to build. But once you give them a pen and they start actually writing what they perceive to do down, you realize that everyone is not aligned. And once you get the conversations going and they're actually working together, you can see how the team starts building those solutions together. And then by the end of the process or whatever it is, everyone's kind of knows exactly, they've come up with a great idea together or a great solution. And and everyone is aligned and agree and can go and do their work. So such an important concept. I love this. Break down those silos, guys. Silos is poison in this framework and these things. So break down the silos, get the conversations, and then retrospect often. So get the people talking about how we can improve the product and how can we improve our processes. So another person out in the product world, Marty Kagan, very well known and an icon in the industry. And what he talks about is good teams solve problems. They don't just create features. Now, that is such an important concept. I think that a lot of, product people that are wanting to build products, they just want to create as many features as possible. But are you solving the right problems, right? So a good team actually solves problems. They don't just create a feature, what they call a feature factory. So product teams, another thing Marty Kagan says, product teams exist to solve problems in ways that work for business and that your customers love. So a good team does all of these things. They're not only solving problems, but they're doing it for the business, and their users and the customers are actually loving it and coming back for more. So very, very important. That was principle one. I know it was a lengthy one. Moving on to principle number 2 is to understand team roles. So in that book that I mentioned earlier, The Sprint, make sure you understand who is the decision maker. So roles and responsibilities is always an important concept in any company, organization. But make sure in this case that you have somebody who's calling the shots, that kind of makes the decisions, is always around. We'll make them involved as much as possible. Make sure everybody understands who that is. The decision maker, for example, has more say. So you might come up with some great ideas and solutions that you think are going to work, but if you don't have that decision maker with you, you've wasted your time. So make sure that you understand who it is and that they can be as involved as possible. The next thing is, do you have a facilitator who can own the ceremonies? So I find this very important, to have a facilitator who can drive the conversations, make sure the compass is always there, and they can drive those ceremonies, those workshops and everything. So a facilitator, which is generally your Scrum Master, make sure you have one to drive all of these things together. And again, I think that's also become quite highlighted in 2020, is to drive those, just making sure that everybody is driving in the same car. If we think about my episode with the Pocket Guides, the Jay Allen and Kirsten, but they talk about the facilitator and the importance of having one, not only in remote spaces though. Right. Does every team member understand what their role in the team is? So do they understand what they're bringing to the table? Also very important. Make sure that everyone knows where they are sitting, and then make sure teams are diverse and cross-functional, especially for the workshops. When I talk about diverse, when you talk about we're going to build a car, are we building it for a soccer mom? Are we building it for a 20-year-old? Are we doing it for a motorbike guy that likes to ride bikes? So, just having a diverse team from all walks of life will bring elements to your product solutions that you haven't thought of. And you obviously, when you build your products, you want to build it for the masses. So having a diverse team helps you understand that you're ticking a lot of your users' boxes, your customers' boxes. Again, being cross-functional, having as many skills around the table as possible, which helps also create the solutions, just having those there when you're developing solutions. The next principle, number 3, is that customer value is actually business value. And I think it's just going from the old school of thinking, is that, the businesses will set out what they think is value. But what we are learning now is that the users, or the people that are actually using our products, are the ones that are giving us value. Because the world is there's so many different products out there now And so if you're not putting the users in front, they can just move on to the next one. That's a very true and concept that is actually happening. So what happens is make sure your team is user-centered, not just feature-centered. You want to make sure that they're looking after the users, thinking about the users, putting their feet in their shoes, and not just building out features. Help make the users more successful. So this is another Jeff Gothelf concept that he says we want to make sure that we are making the user successful with our products and features. So you're not just giving it to them to use. You actually want to turn them. They're going to turn into success. It's a very cool concept to think of, and so just think about that in your product design. And what this does is that it changes the definition of done, because you're not just going from an output way. So an output is just, shooting out features all the time, but you're actually trying to change these outcomes of people's lives or of, customer behavior. So your work isn't done once you've just built something. Your work is done once you've actually implemented some change in their behavior and actually getting people to do things. Also quite an important concept. And how you can do this is using OKRs. OKRs is a way of writing objectives and key results. That's what it stands for. It's been used by Google for many, many years, and it just helps you kind of put that compass in place. Lots of information on the net to go look into it, and I'd recommend looking into building OKRs into your product development. All right, my talk is inspired by many people. Another one is Dan Olson, who teaches us about product market fit. And I'll just go through it very quickly. At the bottom, you've got your users, right? So just now think about your design thinking, where the beginning is empathizing and defining your users. So understanding your target customer is the base of this pyramid. Understanding their underserved needs. So what is it that they're not being, what needs are not being helped at this point? Because then you can understand what your value proposition is, which then helps you build that feature set and the UX that's going to go on top of that. And if you can get those two concepts together from the solution and the product, so the product problem space and the solution space, bringing them together, you can get your product market fit. Okay. So a nice way to kind of also think about it. I would suggest doing more research on that. Another concept, I'm not going to go into too much detail. Just this is the Kano model. Dan Olson also likes to talk about it. And I think the most important thing is how do we build satisfaction within our users? How do we fulfill it? And so if we use Instagram as an example, as our product must-haves, I must be able to share photos, right? That's a must-have. The next thing is the purple line is the ones or the performers, the exciters. Oh, no, sorry, not the exciters, the performers. What's going to stand your product out? If you want to share a photo and it takes an hour to share, no one's going to want to use it. But if you can share and upload a photo quickly and people can see it within seconds, that is what users are going to be using it for. So important concept. And then the exciters. So, in Instagram's case, maybe putting a filter on that photo and sharing it on multiple platforms once you've shared it. So those are the exciters that are going to get the people using the product more and more. And the more you adhere to these concepts, the more your users are going to be happy and they're going to come back for more. So I'm not going to talk more about it. You can research it. Kano model, quite an important concept to think about. So what creates business value? Just to make sure that your business is desirable, it's viable, and it's feasible. So your UX designers are normally in the space with your product owner, your product manager, and they're actually looking at, is what we're building desirable? Will people buy it? Do they actually want it? Is it viable? Should we actually build it? You don't want to spend time building, like I explained in the lean startup, you don't want to be building something that you shouldn't be building. So make sure it's focused. And then feasible, can we actually build it? Is it worth it? Is it something complex and expensive? So can we actually build it? And this will help you create your MVP as discussed earlier, and that MSP, the minimal sellable product. So that's what's going to create value. So think about your users and then moving it into this space. And then an important thing that I feel people are in South Africa specifically are starting to understand is to get validated ideas. So to validate those ideas through user feedback. So you want to get product validation through user feedback and testing. And there's different versions, different types, different ways of going about it. But just to understand, there's usability testing. So when you've designed something that the users are actually able, they also understand it. They also understand, like they work through your designs and it's good. So again, breaking assumptions away and actually getting empirical feedback from your users. There's also things such as website feedback forms, get them to actually fill in their feedback there, or you can do some traditional surveys. So important, get user-centered and not feature-centered. And then a concept that I like to talk about as well, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but yeah, you need to just, when you, especially for a new idea, make sure you start understanding your product is a business. You're not just developing software or starting a website. You need to actually understand, once you start doing it, what are the business elements behind it. And there's a book that I've read called E-Myth, and also recommended read. And what he talks about in his book is, think about your business 3 years down the line. If you can understand that, then you know what you need to do now to get to that point. So build it up, make sure. So for example, support, get that in place. So understanding your business model, very important, that fits in with your product. Because you want to be driving sales and adoption, all right? You don't want to build something that no one is using. So all of these things talks about understanding what are your sales. Again, OKRs, set up some OKRs around your sales and adoption. So getting people onto it. How do you measure this? Make sure you get that data, get your metrics, make sure it's support. You have the support for your product, because you want to retain them, all right? So you don't want to have people falling off as they start using it. Right. Principle number 4. So test high risk hypotheses. So what is a hypothesis statement? This is where your UX designers will sit down and start understanding what the product is, what is the why, and there we go. A nice way to do it is, we believe that by doing this for these people, we will achieve this outcome. So again, you're starting to unpacking who you're doing it for and what you're trying to achieve. We will know this is true when we see this market feedback. So now you're actually starting to look at those key results, those measurable things that is going to drive your product home or make it successful. So just an example, I used sweeps out here as a way, or as an example for us to create a hypothesis statement. So we believe that providing a rating system on our platform for homeowners to rate cleaners, we will expand our marketplace by building trust on the platform. And we'll know this is true when we see a 10% retention rate of customers using the platform. So what are we building? We're building a rating system. Who's it for? Our homeowners. And they're going to be rating the cleaners. And we're going to do this. This is what we're going to achieve. And how we're going to achieve it is by measuring it through our 10% goal that we've set ourselves. So a nice way to just sort of tick all the boxes to make sure what you're building is all aligned. Once you've got all your hypotheses statements together, you can map them out on this little matrix here, where you've got risk versus value. And the big one is where you want to spend most of your time is in that top right. Okay. So top right is where you've got high risk, but high value. So this is where you want to sit down, design, get that design thinking workshops together, get the people around the table, spend time trying to unpack that idea and focus your attention there. If something has high value but very low risk, this is the kind of stuff that you just want to build, right? Because it's kind of those the must-haves for a product. So Instagram's example, it must have a photo sharing thing. It's not risky, but it is needed. It's got high value, so just go and build it, right? And then you've got things that might have low value and low risk. So do you want to spend time testing it? You might not even want to build it in the end of the day. And then obviously low risk but high value. Low value and high risk, these are the things you kind of want to step away. So, but how do you understand these things is to have those workshops, and I'll be talking about that soon. But yeah, so you want to map all your statements, your problem statements together, and map them out just so you know what you're going to be spending your time on solving. Right, the next thing, which I just mentioned, is principle number 5, is make time for workshops, make time for meetings, all right? This day and age, everyone is just so busy all the time, but it's so important that if you just make the time to have workshops, make sure they're time boxed. So that's where your facilitator comes in. So again, I say they are well facilitated. Box those things, but at the end of the day, you're going to save yourself time later on. You might not feel it when you set up a 2 to 3 hour meeting. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, but if it's well facilitated and it's got a compass, having those conversations so that everyone's aligned in the beginning of your product, or when you want to dive into one of those hypothesis statements, it helps later on. So it's going to create alignment so everyone's on the same page. You come up with innovative solutions when you get those workshops together, instead of having it in silos and someone doing it by themselves. And it's going to empower the team because they feel like they're part of the solution. I think I've already mentioned that. And then it's going to motivate them to keep wanting to be part of the team. Very big. I can't drive this more, but make sure you have time for those workshops. I know it's time consuming, but you'll reap the rewards later on. The next principle is to work in short cycles. So this is where Agile and Lean talks to us. And the whole point is to make sure you do less and do it more often. All right. You don't want to be doing spending a month just doing designs and building requirements documents. Write a small document and do it more often. All right. So don't waste time on that initial massive discovery up front. You want to do it a little bit of it and get the team going as quickly as possible. Do less of that, but do it more regularly. Keep it simple and small. Kiss comes in here, so keep it simple, because the big thing you want to do is you want to think about what is the next big thing you want to learn about. What is the most important thing that we are not sure about? We want to learn it as quickly as possible. So Lean talks to us about getting that MVP. So making sure it's as viable as quickly. You want to get those answers as quickly as possible. So how do you do that? Lean Startup talks about experiments. It's also a big movement, is building small, minor experiments that you can learn from. So you want to do small things, but you want to be doing them continuously. And that talks to the lean product development cycle where you build, measure, learn. The next principle is number 7, is to retrospect often. Now, I think that, before I was exposed to Agile, I never did retrospectives in my team or in my companies. Now I can't imagine never not doing them. They're just so important and great to do. What it does is it creates the opportunity to address things and take stock of where the team, the product, or the organization is. Just taking stock of where you are, it's important to create a safe space for people to speak openly and honestly. So how do you understand the health of the team? How do you understand the health of the product or the organization? Is by making that space for people to actually tell you how it is, just speaking openly about it. What this will do is it allows the product manager or the product owner or the stakeholders, or whoever it is, to check the health of the team, check the health of the product. It gives the chance of to get perspective of what needs to improve. So people can actually sit back and think, okay, wow, I didn't realize that we had this problem. It's going to uncover these things. Okay, we need to solve this right now. And it's not just in your product space, but it's also in your team space. It works both ways. So retrospect often on the product, on the team. And then also very importantly, not always looking at where the problems are, but actually giving the team and the company and the organization to celebrate where things are going well. You want to do this as much as possible. Help people keep motivated by celebrating all the good things. Now, there's different ways about going about it, but there's just 3 main questions that you might want to ask. Is asking the team what has worked well, what hasn't worked well, and maybe things that you want to implement. So you get the team around, like I said, open an honest space and get them to write like this. I've got some stickies here, get them to write them down, map them out, get them to talk about it. And then most importantly also is to have action points after retrospect. You want to make sure that someone goes and actually puts some of those things that have been opened up. Someone actually goes and actions what we need to do. There's many different ways. Scrum Masters are great to keep these retrospectives fun. So in this example, I've got your retrospective radar where you can, use whatever sort of, we've got team culture, estimations, communication. These are all elements within what this retrospective is looking at. You get the team to score them. You overlay all the scores together, and you can actually see where the team or where the product or whatever it is, where it's lacking and where we need to put our focus on. A great little tool to use. Again, like I said, there's the starfish diagram. You can do this very quickly. Just draw the starfish on a whiteboard and get the team to start writing on notes what they want more of, less of, what to start, keep, or stop. All right. And to finish off, the last principle is to always be curious. For me, the ABC of life, not just in your product space, but learn about your product. So go and figure out, go and be curious about it. What is happening with it? How is the market receiving it? You want to have that day to go measure the performance, not only of the product, measure the performance of the team, burn down charts and all of that. Always be curious, stay hungry for knowledge. Go to meetups and go network, plug holes, watch the product Mastercast. You want to stay, there's so much knowledge out there and things are moving at such a fast rate. So make sure that you are staying ahead of the game by doing all of these things. Very important. Yeah, and once we're back at the office, walk around, see where teams, look at what teams are doing, highlight what the things are going well, do more of those, and obviously recognizing the bad stuff and do less of that. But stay curious, that you're always hungry for knowledge to learn and grow. I don't think we'll ever, it's like practicing being a lawyer. You don't stop practicing, you're just continuously growing. And the tech industry is very, very fast moving. Final takeaways. I hope you enjoyed it, but just to go over them quickly. Principle number 1, teams over processes, those individuals and interactions. Understand each other's roles. Principle number 2, make sure everyone understands what their role is. Customer value is business value. So treat your project or product as a business and be more customer centric or user centric. Principle number 4, test high risk hypotheses. Principle number 5, make time for workshops. 6, work in short cycles. 7, retrospect regularly. And number 8, ABC, always be curious. And those are the frameworks: Agile, Lean, and Design Thinking. Thank you very much for listening in. I hope you enjoyed it. Please follow me. You can reach out and ask questions. And again, please leave comments in below. I'd love to hear back from you. If you've enjoyed it, please like and share, and please subscribe to the channel. I'll be doing more of these. I'll have guests doing these kind of things. And yeah, to stay ahead of the game, if you're tuned in, you can help stay ahead of the curve. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Cheers, everyone.